Hi guys, Adam Steele here, and today I'm looking at the St. James plugin from Blackstar Amplification. This video is sponsored by Blackstar. They have sent me this plugin to show you all the cool things that it can do, what it's capable of. So without further ado, let's have a bit of a demonstration and I'll show you some of the features because it's got a lot packed in. Okay, so the Blackstar St. James plugin, you can see the EL34 version in front of me. I'm going to play you a demo song that I have been composing here in Studio B. And I used how many copies? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 copies of St. James. So have a listen. So there you go, that had the acoustic style sound, that had 2 heavy rhythm tracks, it had the lead going on, and even St. James on the bass. There was just so much all going on. It's pretty versatile, I've got to say. So first things first, for drums I used the ELE from Spectre Digital, which looks like this. Not overly processed, pretty standard. The bass was the new Singularity plugin from Spectre Digital, which I split into 2 parts. If I turn off the effects, it sounds kind of like, because this is now just a raw bass, basically. So I split it in 2, and one half was a filter that just took out all the high end, and then a really heavy compressor, which did this. And the other half was a St. James, which I will show you now. So the first thing to talk about the St. James plugin is you can expand it up to 200%, so that's great here because I can show you what's going on. So with this being a split of the bass with low and high, if I mute the low one, you can hear what I'm doing there. So for the bass distortion, I've got a compressor at the front of the amp because as we can see at the start here, there's compressor, drive, chorus, phaser. Then the amp, we've got a choice of the 6L6 St. James or the EL34, which are not just different power valves, they are completely different sounding amps, which I will come on to when we talk about the rhythm guitars. That's the best way to show that. For the bass, I used a smaller cab sound with quite a lot of room, and no post effects, and quite a lot of EQ, because there's a whole EQ section here as well. I know I'm flying through this, but when we get to the rhythm guitars in a second, I will slow down and talk a lot more in detail. So you can see that the low cut, I've really taken everything out below 200 Hz on the bass, because that extra track that we had, this one, is doing the lows. So this is doing the highs. So the EQ here has 4 clicks on each EQ point, which I kind of like because it means that it's simplified, because this isn't aimed at like a professional mixing engineer. This is aimed at a guitarist. So you can go like low bass, kind of upper bass, and then there's different mid frequencies where you can go that one, that one, that one, that one, and you can very quickly find a point where you can go, yeah, that's the area I'm looking for. So I've boosted the kind of 500 hertz range here because on bass that brings out a throatiness, and I've dipped out quite a lot of 5K, which is that thing, but I've also lifted what says 18K, but because it's going to be a shelf, that's kind of, it's gently lifting what's below that as well, but I didn't put a high cut in because bass. I just want this to be kind of airy on top. Now let's talk about this properly by looking at the rhythm guitars. We're going to look at the EL34 first, and what I'm going to do is show you this camera, because behold, I have a guitar. And it is drenched in all the effects on the planet. So I'm going to open this, bring up to 200%. It seems that it's currently not kind of keeping the size, but this version of the St. James plugin that I have is very much a pre-release version. This is an early build so that I can show you everything that's going on with said St. James plugin. So little things like that will be long since sorted before this gets into the hands of people as it's released. So yeah, don't worry about the things like that. So first thing I'm going to look at, I'm going to turn off delay and reverb. This was my solo tone, so I'm just going to kind of zero this out a little bit. And then I can look at the amp. So the amp, let's say, that's sounding very big because I've got a lot of room sound on there. So big sounding guitars. The EQ, oh, it has a big low cut, that's why. If I wind that back and wind the high cut back. There we go, still a little bit of a high lift, so. That's the 6L6 St. James on its second gain channel. If I switch that to channel 1, there are separate controls on here, you'll notice, for master volume, which is the amp volume, which determines the power amp kind of saturation, and then in the corner here is output. So if the overall is too loud or too quiet, even if the tone is right, you would use the output knob. If it's not quite kind of tubey enough, you might turn up the master. If it's flubby and oversaturating the power section, you would turn down the master. But yeah, the volume here, this is kind of the clean channel. So if I go to my neck pickup here, so this amp's a little bit crunchy on that volume one, and even with the volume quite low down. This is on the 50 watt model as well. If I go back to gain 2, take that down. We're not on the high gain voice here, we're on kind of the mid gain voice. And I did have the Tube Screamer style drive on then. That explains a lot. If we go back to volume 1. So that's this amp with the bass up a little, middle up a little, and on the clean channel. Rather nice. If I change that to the EL34, every control will change, which is a little bit annoying. But that's partly because it's a completely different amp, so it allows you to A/B them. Your control settings get kept. So at the very least, we can try and A/B them very similarly, but if you don't want them to be similar, that's also great. You can already hear on the clean channel that even though the controls are only slightly different, yeah, so let's bump up bass, bump up the mids. The 6L6 amp is really a lot more high mid aggressive and a lot more in your face. Now if I take the reverb down and go to gain 2, this is where we hear the biggest differences between the two amps. Let's go for voice 1. So there we go, let's try and match these controls. There we go. So even though the controls are very similar, one is a lot more classic rock with that. And the other is much more modern rock. You might notice at this point that I've not had a lot of that, because there is a knob that is just gate. So rather than having a pedal gate, you literally just turn up the gate control. And so if I've got a particularly noisy signal, which I don't really, I mean, that's my background noise surrounded by lights, cameras, screens, everything. I can take that down to like 80 dB, 70 dB. And now I can just do that and I'm not getting any background noise, which is really, really helpful. I mean, the cleaner you play, the better it is, of course. But having said that, don't worry about it. So anyway, the EL34 amp, if I turn on channel 2, voice, that will be... Even on voice 2, it's still very classic rock, a little bit darker on the EL34, so I would have to turn up the gain and the treble more. So with the 6L6 with less gain on voice 1, it's still very different. So if I turn on channel 2 voice on 6L6, this will become very metal. So that sounds quite mid-scooped even with the mids up. I would probably have to boost that with a tube screamer. So if we go back to pre-effects and turn on the drive of TS with gain all the way down. Playing super heavy single string stuff on a green guitar. I'm kind of getting into Andrew Boehner's territory here, but... Yeah, so this amp can go from gain to lots of gain. And that's without touching the EQ in the cab section. Let's get the amp back to something that's still got some gain, because I like some gain, but not crazy amounts. That's more like it. And let's look at the cab rig. So that's moved the amp controls up to the top, but we still have full access to all of them, which is very nice. The amp section just brings this down, because a lot of the amp head that you see up here, it's pretty, but functionally that's dead space. But if that's all you want to see, great. But move to the cab rig, you still have access to those controls at the top. Then you have the cab selection, which is 2 microphones, which you can choose different cabs. So I would choose, let's just completely mute one. Start with one, and we'll look at the list of cabs, because it goes from a 1x12 in the HT Club, Artisan 15, St. James Combo, and then it goes up to the Artisan 2x12, St. James 212, and then my favourites, the 4x12s, the Series 1, the Artisan, the Series 1 Pro, which are not cabs that were designed to be voiced for the St. James, but the St. James is a relatively light amp, and of course you wouldn't really take a light amp out with the 4x12, you'd probably take it out with something like this. So let's try the 2x12. And one little bug right now is that axis means off axis. I think that's backwards, but that will be, again, fixed. And so that's the darker version. So back to on axis. Now that's with a 57, which is quite bright, which tells me that this cabinet is very mid-voiced. The 421. And then we get into the kind of the smoother stuff like the condenser. I mean, the 414 on this cab sounds really good. So a mid-focus cab with a less mid-focus microphone, it's a good combination. There's a 121 ribbon, really thick and big, and a 160 ribbon, which is a bit more mid-focused. And then, of course, you've got all your different cabinets, like Series 1, Artisan, and the Series 1 Pro. Very, very metal. And then, of course, I can pan that all the way to the side and add the second one back in, so I can have completely different sounds. But as a lot of people will tell you, that's not how you make a stereo guitar sound. You make a stereo guitar sound by recording 2 guitars. But it's nice that you can pan them out a little bit if you want. That's quite a nice little trick when you've got a guitar solo and you need it not to just sit right in the middle. So yeah, what I might do is bring a 57 in, maybe off axis. Now that's a very mid-focused sound, but we can go to the EQ now, and that's probably around the 500 hertz range, so I'm going to go turn that up. Yeah, that. Let's turn down that. Beast. And so now I can add in things like the delay, which you can have as ping pong, which I have now time tempo mapped. You can have a brighter delay or a darker delay. A darker delay is really nice if you want to turn it up and have it in the mix more, but not get in the way of the solo. It's got really dark delay. That's probably too dark, but you can go either way. You can turn the mix down and make it brighter, saturate it, too low mix, so it's now distorted. But either way that you want to do it, you can either distort the delay separately or not. There is a reverb that's kind of a digital reverb. Oh boy, that's different from the amp reverb, so that you can switch it on and off and get that big 80s kind of sound. Speaking of which, if we go back to the pre-effects, there's chorus and phaser. Hello 80s. Then let's just turn those off again and look at the flange. That's a really, what's the word? Subtle flanger. Now let's take the gain all the way down and turn off that screaming screamer. Go to the neck pickup. And without changing the cab, that still sounds really decent. Now let's try the tremolo. Ah, it can be an auto panner as well. Yeah. I pushed the depth too far, it became a square wave. Very nice with the harmonic option there. The delay we've seen, the reverb we've seen, the chorus and phaser. Compressor for clean sounds if you want them to stick out more. Best stop playing there because that's getting wonderfully close to copyrighted every ballad ever. So on and so forth. But yeah, this is all on the 6L6. If I go back to the EL34, that's a much rounder sound, even with the treble relatively high and the cab the same. Now, something that's worth talking about, I'm going to turn off the reverb, turn off that reverb. So it's very dry. And I'm going to look at the room, because without the room, the guitars can sound quite, what's the word? Not real. But we've had the room on the entire time, kind of medium and wide. You can hear it there when I go chick chick. It's kind of a magic sauce to make the whole thing feel like a proper recording. I can make it a small room, which means that it's much less reverberant, but that's also with the microphone distance on the room different. With the close mics like that, even with a lot of room on there, that's not the same as amp reverb. It's not the same as pedal reverb. It's put you in a space reverb, like in a real room. And that can be the difference, especially with something like a guitar solo, between it just kind of disappearing in the mix and having its own place. So yeah, I do like to have wide rooms, but spaced is also a good kind of middle ground. Turn the room all the way up. That really depends on the type of sound though. If I go for gain, this isn't going to sound right. Well, it's not too bad, but it's a little washy, and on a large room, that's just way too much. But if I back the amount off and maybe close the room down, even in a large room and the right kind of genre, like in a blues kind of track, I've got a little too much gain going on there for a bluesy kind of thing. But if I back the gain down, you can feel that room there is really holding it together so it doesn't just sound plastic. Because that's traditionally one of the big differences between a plug-in of some kind and a real amp, is that when you hear a real amp, you're in the room with it, and that room, that's the missing link. Because if you're sat in another room from the amp and you've got the monitors and it's completely dry, it always feels wrong. But if you can blend in as an engineer a little bit of that room, or if you've got another microphone further back that's just blending in a little, that can make all the difference. And that's exactly what's happening here. And it's just an extra thing. So there's all the EQ you can go for, including taking the top off if it's too fizzy, taking the low out without having to have any extra plugins, all these extra pedals, the 2 amps, the full cab rig that's got a lot of controls but still relatively simple, and 2 different types of overdrive, compressor, chorus, phaser. Pretty much everything you need to make a finished guitar tone. And beyond that, anything that an engineer would be doing with it would be real subtle little polish. I mean, you just heard the demo that I did at the start there, and it sounded ready to go. And I'll just close this down for a second so you can see the only plugins here. I had a tuner on one of the guitars, so I'll just quickly play the rhythms. This is the EL34 on the left. I made it quite snarly sounding with the Series 1 4x12 and a fair amount of gain. And then the right hand side one was the 6L6. It was the Series 1 Pro and the much heavier voice, but together. And without that tuner plugin there, which I can just quickly get rid of, that's it. Everything from the high bass upwards is all just St. James. And that's how it sounds. So what more can I say? So there you go, there's a lot to love with the new Blackstar St. James plugin, with the completely different voices on the 2 amps and all the extra features that come along in the plugin. Especially the standalone mode will be useful for a lot of people, I know. I'm using the VST3 version, it's AAX for Pro Tools as well, so whatever platform you're running it on, it should work absolutely perfectly. Anyway, thank you everybody for watching. Thanks to all the patrons on Patreon for supporting me and helping me to keep the lights on. Stay tuned for a lot more cool videos coming up. Like, I'm completely rewiring the guitar setup over there to be a lot less noisy, and I'll talk about how it's less noisy. I've got these Calis behind me, which are going to be in an Atmos setup, which is very cool. And there's a lot of rewiring and a lot of kind of blood, sweat and tears going in at the minute. So you'll see all that very soon. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all in the next video. Goodbye.